Alternate script: Detroit's noble failures, the forgotten champions of 1950s America. When we think of the 1950s, we picture chrome bumpers catching sunlight, tail fins reaching toward the sky, and highways stretching endlessly into the American horizon. But beneath that polished surface, Detroit was not just about celebration. It was war. Every carmaker gambled everything on horsepower, sheet metal, and the promise of prosperity. Some vehicles were designed to revolutionize comfort, performance, and prestige. Instead, they became tombstones marking the end of entire legacies. Beyond household names like Chevrolet and Ford, there existed manufacturers who invested their last dollar, their final hope, into one magnificent machine before vanishing into history's shadows. This video isn't about the victors. It's about the magnificent failures, the automobiles that carried the dreams, the ambition, and yes, the flaws of 1950s Detroit. Henry J. Kaiser, the shipbuilder's gamble. Our story opens with Kaiser Motors and the visionary Henry J. Kaiser, a man forged in shipyards, steel mills, and wartime miracles, where impossibility was just another problem to solve. His ambition was simple: build cars smarter, leaner, and faster than anyone else. The 1955 Kaiser Manhattan became both the purest expression of that vision and its most heartbreaking goodbye. Mechanically, the Manhattan refused to be ordinary. Its power plant was a 206 cubic inch flathead inline, 6 already an antique in the age of V8 dominance. But Kaiser paired it with a McCulloch supercharger coaxing out 140 horsepower, a respectable number that allowed this 6-cylinder sedan to run with mainstream V8 competitors. The Manhattan also featured a sweeping wraparound windshield that curved like a fighter jet canopy, a design element that whispered of tomorrow. Inside, you found cloth and leather appointments, carefully crafted instruments, and spacious seating that proved Kaiser understood post-war America's deepest desires: comfort, openness, and optimism. But here's the brutal truth: it cost too much. Without the economies of scale enjoyed by the Big Three, Kaiser couldn't absorb production expenses. Every Manhattan sold became a financial tightrope walk. The stubborn commitment to a supercharged 6-cylinder raised eyebrows among buyers, while manufacturing costs remained crushing. By 1955, the dream ended. Kaiser exited the American passenger car business, leaving the Manhattan as an incomplete sentence. Continental Mark II, perfection is a business mistake. Then there's the Continental Mark II, launched in 1956. This wasn't a car built to chase sales volume. It was built to prove that Detroit could manufacture perfection. Its 368 cubic inch V8 delivered between 285 and 300 horsepower, running with silken refinement. But raw power wasn't what separated the Mark EAV from everything else. What made it legendary was the obsessive craftsmanship. Nearly hand-assembled, each Mark II rode on a dedicated X-member frame, with body panels fitted to tolerances unheard of in mass production. Before leaving the factory, each car underwent the most rigorous quality control regime Detroit had ever implemented, so extreme that Ford's own engineers called it madness. Then came the reckoning, priced at $10,000, roughly the cost of a suburban home. The Mark I entered a marketplace it never belonged in. Worse, Ford lost thousands on every unit sold. Each departing Mark I AD was a masterpiece on wheels and a line of red ink in the ledger. By 1957, production ceased. Not because it was flawed or weak, but because it was too good, too refined, too divorced from the cold mathematics of American manufacturing. Packard Hawk, a king in borrowed armor. If Packard once ruled Detroit's upper echelon, the 1958 Packard Hawk was an aging monarch dressed in someone else's clothes, walking silently onto the battlefield. There was a time when Packard meant power, elegance, and the gold standard of American luxury. But after the painful merger with Studebaker, Packard lost its own platform, its own engines, its own engineering independence. The Hawk emerged from this crisis as a last-ditch effort to keep the nameplate alive for one more season, one fragile breath. Mechanically, the Hawk was no weakling. It packed Studebaker's 299 cubic inch V8 with a McCulloch supercharger, generating roughly 295 horsepower. On the open road, it lunged forward with raw ferocity, the supercharger's whine howling like defiance. By the numbers, this was one of the most potent machines ever to carry the Packard badge, pure American muscle. Perfectly suited to the late 1950s, but the Hawk didn't die from lack of power. It died from identity crisis. The body was a Studebaker Golden Hawk. The fiberglass nose attempted to mimic Packard heritage. Two souls collided in one steel body. When 1958 ended, so did the Packard name on American automobiles. What's your take? Was the supercharger on the Hawk engineering brilliance or a desperate gamble? Drop your thoughts below. I genuinely want to hear what you think. Hudson Hornet, the low-riding giant killer. In the early 1950s, while most American cars stood tall, soft, and tipsy through corners, Hudson took a radical path. They pioneered the revolutionary step-down design, placing the floor pan below the frame rails and dramatically lowering the center of gravity. The result was a Hudson Hornet that cornered like a European sports car, flat, stable, and unnervingly precise compared to its competition. Under the hood lived a 38 cubic inch inline, 6 enhanced with the twin H-power setup using dual carburetors. The horsepower numbers might seem modest on paper, but the massive torque and legendary reliability made the Hornet a terror on racetracks. Those back-to-back NASCAR championships weren't just trophies. They were pride for an independent automaker daring to fight the Big Three, but Detroit didn't run on racing glory alone. The market demanded annual restyling, longer, lower, shinier. And here, Hudson's brilliance became its curse. The step-down design, genius from an engineering perspective, was brutally expensive to modify. Every cosmetic update required massive structural investment Hudson couldn't afford. While GM and Ford changed clothes yearly, Hudson began looking dated on showroom floors, even though underneath it remained mechanically superior. Customers drifted away. Racing wins couldn't save the balance sheet. By the mid-1950s, Hudson was absorbed in a merger, and the Hornet name lost its original fire. DeSoto Adventurer crushed in the middle. Next is the DeSoto Adventurer, created to bridge the gap between Dodge and Chrysler, a mid-tier brand refined enough to desire yet affordable enough to reach. Technically, the Adventurer held its own. Under the hood sat an early-generation Hemi firepower V8, the very engine that built Chrysler's street and track reputation. Abundant power, monster torque, and effortless highway cruising made the Adventurer a machine built for America's endless asphalt ribbons. Stylistically, DeSoto wore Virgil Exner's forward look philosophy: long, low bodies with tail fins reaching skyward like missiles. It was an aggressive design language that made the car appear to be accelerating even at a standstill. The Adventurer looked powerful, confident, perfectly mirroring America's post-war optimism. Then, 1958 arrived like a cold front. Economic recession made buyers cautious, and as the market contracted, Chrysler began cannibalizing itself. Dodge climbed upmarket while Chrysler lowered its price barriers. DeSoto was squeezed in the middle with nowhere to breathe. The Adventurer became collateral damage. By 1961, the DeSoto name disappeared not in a dramatic collapse, but like a brand quietly erased from the blueprint. Edsel citation, the tragedy of marketing over substance. If Detroit ever suffered a wound it never wanted to reopen, it was the Edsel citation. No brand was ever born with more research, more anticipation, more capital behind it than Edsel, and none fell faster, harder, or more publicly. This wasn't just a failed car. It was the tragedy of believing marketing could manufacture desire. In the late 1950s, Ford believed it could scientifically calculate American taste. Thousands of surveys, years of analysis, and an unprecedented advertising blitz. From this emerged Edsel, not as just another car brand, but as a sociological experiment. Edsel was supposed to be the car Americans didn't yet know they craved. Specification-wise, the 1958 Edsel citation didn't deserve mockery. Under the hood sat the E4055 V8 with 410 cubic inches delivering 4055 lb-ft of torque, an enormous figure even by modern standards. On the highway, the citation pulled hard, smooth, and authoritative. This was a car born to devour American miles. Edsel also boasted cutting-edge technology. Most famous was the Teletouch system, push-button gear selection mounted directly in the steering wheel hub, a futuristic concept promising convenience and modernity. In practice, it became a maintenance catastrophe. Minor electrical or hydraulic glitches that might have been tolerable on a dashboard became disasters when located on the steering wheel, the one place a driver demands absolute reliability. But the fatal blow wasn't mechanical. It was expectation. Marketing created a myth the actual car couldn't fulfill. When buyers entered showrooms, they encountered the controversial horse collar grille, inconsistent build quality, and a product that wasn't what they'd been promised. The lesson: too good for their own good. Looking back at these names, One truth must be spoken clearly: these cars didn't fail because they were inferior. Most were too good, too different, or too faithful to their own vision in a world where accounting and scale were the ultimate judges. 1950s Detroit showed no mercy to the unconventional. A car could be engineering excellence, but if it didn't align with mass production economics, it was discarded without hesitation. The Kaiser Manhattan was too idealistic with resources running dry. The Continental Mark II was too perfectionist in a city ruled by assembly lines. The Hudson Hornet was ahead in chassis design yet imprisoned by that very innovation. The Packard Hawk clung to identity through horsepower, while Edsel believed advertising could substitute for genuine market understanding. Today, it's precisely these losers that are hunted by collectors. A pristine Continental Mark II is treasured far more than many bestsellers from its era. The Hudson Hornet, once dismissed as outdated, is now a mechanical icon. Their value doesn't lie in sales figures but in the stories, philosophies, and engineering courage they embody. The mass-market Chevys and Fords fulfilled their mission, putting America on wheels. But these failed cars accomplished something else. They showed how boldly Detroit once dared to dream. They dared unconventional structures, built cars as art, placed identity above profit, even briefly. If you've ever driven one of these machines, tell me how it felt in the comments. And if you value preserving these stories, subscribe so we can honor together the beautiful ghosts of 1950s Detroit. See you next time.